Hey everybody, it is Gordon Majak here, back with another episode of Timeless Pop, Rock, and Soul. And friends, today I have to tell you, I am so freaking excited today for the big channel. And that is because I am about to play not one, not two piece like Ringo, not Let me start over. I am so excited today, and that is because I am about to play not one, not two, but three of my all-time favorite songs from the decade of the 1980s. And I'm going to do them boom, 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 three in a row. And I can't wait because I love these songs. And I think maybe one or two of them may sort of catch you off guard and surprise you a little bit, but hopefully at least one or two of the three will be among your favorites as well, because these, to me, today, we are going to do three classic songs, three giants, okay? And our story is going to begin here in part one back in 1985. And this story is a little convoluted, so I'm going to try to navigate this as clearly as I can. It was early 1985, I'm guessing maybe late February, early March, when a new film came out in the theaters that was widely acclaimed, highly acclaimed. And I was excited to go see this movie in the theaters there shortly after its release, and so I did that. And I don't want to say too much. I'll obviously tell you the title of the film and everything else here in a second when we get to the musical part of it. But I don't want to spoil the story too much of the movie, other than to say it was quite entertaining. It is a movie that if you haven't already seen it, it's definitely worth looking up and spending a few hours watching it. It's definitely an entertaining story. And all I will say about the plot is that it is the story of two interesting fellows on a journey of self-destruction. Let's just leave it at that. But a great film. Now, so I go to that film. I go to the movie there at the theater, and I see this movie, which you'll learn of here in a second. And I have to tell you, great film in and of itself, but the music in this film was just incredible. And I have to say, when I think back on it now in reflection all these years later, this is back to 1985, I don't think I had any awareness of anything about the music for the film going into seeing the film. I think all I knew was just the information in the story about the film itself and the actors and the story and all of that. I don't think I had any advanced knowledge of anything about the soundtrack or the music for the film going in to see the film. So hearing the music in the film while the film was playing, that was my initial exposure to the movie music, okay? So, good film, as I said, but the music just knocked me out of my chair there in the theater. And I stuck around there for the end credits as they rolled the end credits to find out who and what was responsible for this incredible music in this movie. And here's what we discovered there as they rolled the credits. It was a collaboration of a couple artists that on the surface of it might seem to be a bit of an odd fit, but then when you think about it a little deeper, and as I'll get into here in a second, man, what a combination, what a collaboration, what a great thing it turned out to be. From early 1985, it is a film called The Falcon and The Snowman, music by the Metheny group, including a song that features the vocals of David Bowie, a song called This Is Not America. So this is David Bowie with the Metheny group, okay? And the film is The Falcon and the Snowman. Great film and an even better soundtrack. And this song, whew. So there I am in the theater. watching this film, and at some point in the film, and I don't remember exactly the scene, this particular song comes into play. And as I said going in, I didn't know who or what was playing or singing or anything until after the film was over, and I stuck around to catch the credits and found out that it was David Bowie and the Pat Metheny Group. But at whatever point in the film that this song came in, all I can remember was just the incredible atmosphere. First of all, the entire soundtrack has just got so much atmosphere and so much space to it. It's just remarkable, but really still very touching music, very compelling music. And at whatever point it was when this particular song played, I just remember this musical track just sort of floating along, just like out in space, just floating along. There was so much space in this track. And then these vocals were just absolutely mesmerizing. And I wasn't sure who the singer was. I don't think I guessed that it was David Bowie. That's not my recollection. But all I could think of on those vocals, again, with this atmosphere, and there was just so much space around this vocal. And it was absolutely mesmerizing. And I was particularly haunted by a certain vocal lick in the song that to me just ends up being one of the main hooks of the song. And it's just an ad-lib vocal by David Bowie that has always just sent chills down my spine and still does to this day. It happened again this morning as I was queuing the song up. So let's talk a little bit about Pat Metheny, first of all, because he's responsible for the soundtrack of the film and obviously an incredible artist in his own right. Let's talk about the Pat Metheny Group really quickly here, and then we'll get to the David Bowie part of it, and then we'll get straight into the song. So this song, This Is Not America, written by David Bowie and Pat Metheny's longtime keyboardist there in the Pat Metheny Group, the great Lyle Mays. The great Steve Rodby, of course, who's the bassist in the Pat Metheny Group, of course, for many years, many albums. He is also on this particular recording. This song, as a single, got up to number 14 in the UK and number 32 on the US pop chart. So not a huge hit, and certainly not by David Bowie standards, considering how big of success he had there earlier in the 80s. This is 85. I mean, he's just coming off of Let's Dance as just the previous 2 years there. So not a huge hit by David Bowie standards, but such a masterful musical performance, first of all, by Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays and Steve Rodby, laying down such an incredible musical track. And then David Bowie comes in and just sings a vocal that just completely haunted me from day one and still does. Now, Pat Metheny, I was aware of Pat Metheny all the way back there, I want to say late 70s, when he really sort of just exploded on the scene and was getting a lot of airplay on one of the jazz stations that I used to listen to from time to time. And I just remember Pat Metheny was just sort of like an instant sensation back there in the jazz guitar world in the late 70s, because he was just so clearly and so obviously just an absolutely one in a million player, and I think was just universally acknowledged as one of the great contemporary young jazz musicians, great guitarists, certainly. So I remember hearing Pat Metheny on the radio back there, and I did have a couple of his CDs later on there in the 80s as well. But I think back to Pat Metheny records like that Off Ramp album there. What a hugely impactful record that was in the world of jazz guitar. That was back in 1981. That Still Life Talking album there in 1987, that was a little bit after this Falcon and the Snowman soundtrack, a few years later. That was a huge album too, and it's like Pat Metheny just kept churning out so many of these albums that just were constantly re-identifying sort of what he was capable of doing. The great Letter from Home album there, that's in 1989. There's three quick favorites for me, personal favorites of the Pat Metheny Group going back there, as I said, into the late 70s and early 80s. So Pat Metheny, just unquestionably such a tasteful and such a progressive artist. You could call him jazz, you can call him jazz rock, you can call him really, it just doesn't even matter, I don't think, how you label Pat Metheny. an extraordinary, masterful musician, and has been recognized as such for many, many decades now. Now, the David Bowie side of this whole equation is a little bit of a weird story. First of all, full disclosure here, I have to say my younger sister, Jennifer, is the biggest David Bowie fan in the world, okay? She knows it all. She knows him inside out, upside down, backward and forward. The music, the personal stuff, she knows all of it. She is the David Bowie expert, okay? So you might have thought that some of David Bowie juice would have rubbed off on me from my sister, but for whatever reason, it hasn't. And over all the years, I have to say, I have such a strange relationship with David Bowie. First of all, let me say unquestionably, I have the absolute, in hindsight now, all these years later, knowing him now as I do versus how I knew him back in the day, when I first became aware of him there. I think the first time I heard Bowie was when Space Oddity was such a big hit there in the early 70s, because they had released it once before and it didn't do anything, and then they brought it back in 1973, and then that's when it became a huge hit and such an iconic song. So I think that was my introduction to Bowie, so let's say early 70s when I was aware of him. But the thing that's just weird about Bowie, and I think maybe part of it's just a guilt by association thing, where because I was into so many other styles of music and so many other artists and just different types of music and stuff back in those days, even as a teenager, I really wasn't into the glam stuff, right? So I never had anything certainly against David Bowie. There was never a thing where I disliked him or had anything bad to say about him, musically or otherwise. It's just that I tended to gravitate away from the entire glam thing back there in the day, because I was just always much more focused on, I just really wanted to hear great music. I wasn't interested in the presentation and the showy part of it, and the visual part of it, and the characters, and everything that goes along with the whole glam thing, right? The costumes, the whole thing, characters, all of that. I was just more focused on the music. I just wanted to hear great music, which is not to say that there wasn't obviously a lot of great music that came out of glam. But for me, I was just so focused on music that sometimes all that other stuff was more of a barrier to me, to make it less likely for me to want to, check out those artists than I would have otherwise been with groups that were less visually oriented, let's say, and just maybe that I perceived as being more musically oriented. Okay, so never had a problem with Bowie though. But then certainly, Space Oddity there in the early 70s, that would have been my first exposure to him. And then, he rattled off quite a string of great stuff there in the mid to late 70s. I always loved Young Americans. I always loved his single Changes. I always thought that was a really cool song. I think Young Americans was probably my early Bowie favorite there. And as he carried on there, into the 80s and having all those huge hits with Nile Rodgers there on that Let's Dance album, and even for a while after that, I think it just took me just exposure over so many years to get further and further away from the glam and all the background stuff, and just to appreciate him more as a legacy artist and as just a consummate creative chameleon, right? Isn't that what David Bowie is? I mean, just all these years later now, I have such a greater appreciation for him, and on every level, as a songwriter, and knowing how he wrote such a vast majority of his own material all those years that we called the classic David Bowie years. I mean, he was writing all of that stuff himself. The whole thing was his creation. So to think of him as a writer and a musician, of course, and most of all for me, and I know he did acting and he did all this other stuff. I mean, he was so active and so creative in so many different artistic fields. And he was a pretty good actor too, actually. But I think most of all, as a singer, I never appreciated as much as I do now the vocals of David Bowie and that ability. It's like now I get it. Now I get that ability to to have so much talent as a singer, but it's even bigger than just the singing and the raw vocals. It's having that talent, which he obviously is his definition, it's his signature. It's like a multidisciplinary talent. You know, he's so brilliant and such a genius in so many artistic categories, whether it's design or the visual thing or sound or musically. Fashion, right? He's got all of these interests and all of these areas of inspiration going on, and he puts all that together as a vocalist, his ability to sort of inhabit those characters through and express it through his vocals, and it can change in a song, it can change in a phrase, and he sings from different positions, he sings from different outlooks and different perspectives as the songs go along, right? So that's what I never appreciated as much as I do now. And I have to, because I would not have said, you know, back then in the day, I would not have said, oh, he's one of my favorite singers or whatever, right? I wouldn't have really paid much attention to his vocals. I would have said, oh, yeah, it's good enough, you know, for the record, but he wouldn't have been one of my favorite singers. But now, all these years later, I really, in particular, I really appreciate the vocal genius of being able to inhabit those lyrics, which he wrote, as we said, the bulk of that music and those lyrics himself. So to really inhabit that music that he created and sing it from so many different vocal perspectives and so many different character situations, just remarkable. Truly remarkable to think back all these years later on David Bowie. So, yeah, I think Young Americans and Changes, I especially like those two. Young Americans, probably my favorite David Bowie song, other than this one. So to tie this back to the movie, I'm there in the theater watching this movie, and this song starts playing, and I was absolutely haunted, mesmerized. And as I said, the music throughout the entire film is remarkable. And of course, the minute you find out that it's Pat Metheny, the guy is just a straight out genius and did such an incredible job on this film soundtrack in general. And then, of course, to bring David Bowie in to do the vocal on this song, another stroke of genius. And apparently, as the story goes, they bring David Bowie in to see an advanced screening of the movie, and he's taking notes, and he's listening to the dialogue, and he's watching the characters and everything. And apparently, the phrase, "This is not America," was uttered by one of the characters in the film. And for some reason, it really stuck in David Bowie's head, and he really thought that that was a cool line and that he could do something with that lyrically, which he did. He wrote an absolutely incredible set of lyrics for this song. And then, as I said, the ultimate chameleon, the ultimate creative chameleon, adopts a vocal sound and a vocal perspective to deliver these lyrics. And haunting is the only word I can use to describe it, folks. It haunted me to death in the theater, and that's why I had to stick around and find out who the hell it was. And my mind was blown when I found out that it was this collaboration. And it still haunts me all these years later. And as I said, I have so much greater appreciation for it now than I did even then. It's one of my all-timers from the 1980s, folks. It is David Bowie and the Pat Metheny Group from the soundtrack to the film The Falcon and The Snowman from early 1985. This is not America. It always just kills me, the juxtaposition in this song of this sort of girl group type inspired background vocals there with this little sha-la-la-la-la thing, which is so cute. And yet the lyrics are so dark and so foreboding here. And that counterbalance there of the lightness and the heaviness always killed me about this. And of course, Bowie's vocal is just unbelievable. Every time I hear it, it just kills me. What a piece of music. No joke, friends. I'm sitting there in the theater and this song is playing in the theater. And the first time Bowie hits that high lick there and does that, no, I just about lost it. And then, of course, he comes back in and does it a few more times there before the end. And every time he hits that one freaking note, that one word, the way he bends that, God, what a hook. It's just a sound. He's making one sound, and it's a hook in the entire song, one of the hooks in the entire song. And I love this arrangement. I mean, it's just, what would you expect from, I mean, the collaboration, it seems odd at first, maybe like for the first 2 seconds, but then when you think about the absolute genius level of these talents, and like I said about the song being so atmospheric and so haunting, I mean, come on. Do you think David Bowie was just a master of creating this very atmospheric, when he wanted to, creating music that was just very atmospheric and very haunting? Yeah, he was a master of that. Do you think Pat Metheny in his career as a jazz musician and exploring so many different idioms of jazz and world music and just so many different categories of music, do you think Pat Metheny maybe is just a master of creating music that has spaciousness and atmospheric feel to it and that haunting quality? Yeah, he's a master of that. And you put, I mean, in that sense, their talents are so complementary. They're talents that are used to exploring space, and they're completely comfortable, both Pat Metheny and his group and David Bowie, they're completely comfortable exploring the fringes and going outside of whatever the norm is at any given point with any given style of music. So it's just, I don't know enough about the backstory to know whose idea it was or how this collaboration came to be. I know there are some interviews out there with Pat Metheny, but I just don't know off the top of my head if he ever talks about how the Bowie thing came to be on this film here for Falcon and the Snowman. But just such an incredible combination, and certainly every time I hear it, I'm reminded, yeah, as much as I love some of the other Bowie stuff, I mean, I really liked Modern Love and China Girl. I thought were pretty cool singles, and I loved Young Americans and Changes back there in the day. But every time I hear this one, man, this is just a moment that's seared into my brain from sitting there in the theater and hearing this the first time. And then when I found out who it was, getting that soundtrack, and never lost track of this one. That is for sure. What can you say about David Bowie, man? That voice. how did I not get the voice thing sooner? It took me a while to come around to the voice. And I just the other day, in fact, as I was preparing for this show, maybe it was yesterday or the day before, I saw a live video, and I take it must have been fairly rare because Bowie said in the video on stage introducing this song, it's a live video of this song, This Is Not America. I think this is from like 2000 or maybe the early 2000s, 2003, something like that. I don't remember exactly. And he introduces the song and says, we're playing this one live. You know, we have never played this one here on UK soil before, but here it is. And he introduces the song. And it's just, of course, an extraordinary live version. And his vocals just freaking mesmerizing. And I just saw that. And that was another mind blower just from a couple days ago. So, yeah, what can we say about David Bowie? As I said, my sister, the biggest Bowie fan in the world. I will have to get my sister in here to sit down with us and tell us the story of when she met, actually, both of my sisters. My sisters, Becky and Jennifer, were in Australia because at the time my mom was living in Australia for work because of her husband's work. And so both of the girls were in Australia for a while, and I'm thinking, how old would they have been? They were teenagers still. 83? Yeah, they were like still teenagers. And they were in Australia for a while, and they saw David Bowie in the airport in Australia. And this is at the absolute height of his Let's Dance album, the whole Nile Rodgers thing, the videos on MTV, the songs are all huge hits. This is right in the middle of that. And he's out on his Let's Dance world tour. Okay, that's why he's in Australia. And my sisters, both of them saw him in the airport, and all I will tell you, I don't want to spoil the story, and it's not my story to tell. Jennifer needs to come in here and tell it herself to you guys, and you guys will. It's such a cool story, and I just don't want to spoil it. I want her to tell it in her own words because it was so cool. And you will hear what just an absolute freaking legend and coolest guy ever David Bowie was. What a shock, right? That's the other thing I think I really came to appreciate much later. And this, actually, I have to say, is where Jennifer, being such a big fan, did come into play for me because she sent me so many videos after he passed away of various interviews that he gave and stuff. And I think that was the other thing that sort of made me more of a fan, even as much as his music, more so just him, the artist. And I always loved, I've seen so many videos now of him being interviewed and just talking and just hearing him speak and hearing him think out loud and his voice and his thought process and just hearing him talk about life and art and everything. And that's been a real eye-opener too, and gave me more of an insight into him on the personal side that I really enjoyed that part. So anyway, there is our David Bowie moment to get us started on that here in the 1980s, man. One of my all-time favorites, Pat Metheny, and what a soundtrack. This is an album, the soundtrack here for the Falcon and the Snowman. Yeah, this is a really cool album, and it's probably impossible to find. But man, what a great soundtrack, Pat Metheny. As you would expect, a top shelf production all the way around. The Falcon and the Snowman soundtrack. They get together with David Bowie for This Is Not America. Man, an incredible. Gets us off to a great start here. I still have two more of my all-time faves from the 80s coming, and they're going to sort of, you'll have to think about it. I'm just going to leave it up to you guys to figure it out for yourselves. You'll interpret it however you're going to interpret it, but there is some sort of a connection, and that's all I'm going to say musically, some other sort of connection perhaps between these three songs, starting with this one, This Is Not America. Let's see what we got next. See you soon. No! God, when he does that, it just gives me chills.